Howdy, everybody. We'll get started in just a minute here. Hopefully, you guys and gals can hear me okay. All right, let's go ahead and do this thing. It is 1 o'clock by my clock. I want to be respectful of your time. So um, I'll cover just a couple of brief announcements to start to give anybody who's having trouble logging on or finding stable Wi-Fi a chance to get into the class and join us. And from there, we're going to jump back into talking about DDT as kind of an early, critically important example topic for interpretation, and to kind of wrap up talking about how Rachel Carson used DDT and mated that with a bunch of environmental interpretation techniques around the time that your parents and maybe some of your grandparents were kind of coming up um, in kind of mid-century United States America. So from there, we'll go into our just kind of tie up and finish off the figurative language stuff. That worksheet is coming due here, and then kind of we'll spend the big chunk of our class on the template we started last week for sort of knowing where to put all this stuff in either staffed interpretation like a hike, uh, or like a campfire chat is a very common kind of nice interp format. It's kind of fun for everybody who doesn't like hanging around a campfire. Or non-staff kinds of interpretation, again, like those junior ranger booklets we talked about on our very first day. Okay, so before we jump back into our class stuff, now that you guys have had a kind of a second to log on, does anybody have any announcements for the class, like meetings? I think Forestry Club meets on Mondays. I don't know if you're meeting this week. Stuff like that. Any announcements from the floor for the good of the cause? And I just realized phones aren't even on. There we go. Now I can actually hear you, hopefully. Okay, so any announcements for the good of their cause? Okay, easy enough. All right, so from here, let's again, let's kind of just a brief circle back to kind of remind us what we were working on pretty hard last week. So these figurative language techniques, just trying to snap us out of that very comfortable habit for a lot of us of using the technical language that we're trained up with as foresters into more approachable to regular people, kind of the normies, the moms and dads, the aunts and uncles, grandparents, cousins you're talking with when you're home for winter break or over summer, coworkers who don't necessarily have the wonderful benefit of your post-secondary education. So we don't want to take that awesome blessing for granted. Okay, so first up, let's take a look at your screen here for a second. I'm gonna screen share just a couple of graphics. We're not gonna do like death by PowerPoint today, but just a couple of pictures concerned with, first of all, Rachel Carson, so you can see kind of who she was. So we can put a more human face on this struggle with feeding millions of people. So modern synthetic insecticides, pesticides, as the more general term. Pests can include arachnids as well as insects. So pesticide is the more suitable term generally. And kind of who's wrestling with it. So back in '62, this is the gal. She was a biologist, and she's sort of coming into her professional sort of arc after World War II, when we have all this extra military, industrial, factory capacity to make things like DDT. So one thing that sometimes our students will kind of get confused with DDT is the insect repellent DEET. That's a totally separate chemical developed for World War II as a plasticizer. So you would add DEET to a bit of plastic to make it softer and more flexible. Plasticizers are very commonly used in, like, you know how the maybe the dashboard of your car, or like the hand grips in your car, the colloquially called oh shit handles up by your door. Those plastics are mixed with plasticizers so that they're not rigid, cheap feeling plastic. They feel a little bit closer to pleather or synthetic leather. And DEET is a really, really good insect repellent because that complex molecule that's so good at dissolving plastics partially so they feel soft to the human touch, and kind of that faux luxe interior of vehicles and stuff like that. New car smell is literally plasticizer chemicals, to help kind of connect that to your own experience. So it's a good insect repellent because it just sort of gets into the equivalent of the mosquito's nose and completely just wipes out those chemical receptors, and just like they'll fly right by your face when you're slathered with pure DEET. I used it hiking the Appalachian Trail. That's probably one of the many good reasons why I should never have kids. They'll be all sorts of weird and deformed if I ever did have kids. So that's a thing. That's separate from DDT. DDT is a pesticide, not an insect repellent. And DDT is what Rachel Carson is concerned with, and what Joni Mitchell is concerned with, writing that song, Big Yellow Taxi, that we diagnosed this past week. All right, so here are some contemporary examples at the time. So this is what Rachel Carson is pushing back against. She writes this book, and it's got all kinds of good, hard field biology stuff in it, case studies, research field studies that we're starting to uncover effects like DDT as it bioaccumulates in bald eagles, for example. The fish that they eat have absorbed some DDT that got into the water supply. Bald eagle catches the fish, eats the fish. that persistent chemical, DDT, starts to bioaccumulate inside the bald eagles, and particularly in the females. And when they lay their eggs, the shell of the egg is too thin. And so when the eagles go to incubate the eggs by, just kind of sitting on them and sharing body warmth with those eggs against the insulation of the nest, the eggs would just shatter, and you'd see like eagle egg yolk dripping through the bottom of these huge nests. And so that happened enough and hard enough that bald eagles became a threatened species. We were killing off our own national symbol. So all that's happening in the context of some of these advertisements. So Trim's brand DDT, children's room wallpaper, okay? So you hear the old joke about people eating lead paint chips and getting brain damage from that. Imagine having insecticide impregnated into your wallpaper, which, does a good job of killing mosquitoes and ants and so forth. But, your kids are touching the wall, they're absorbing some of that DDT, it's bioaccumulating and persisting in them. It doesn't break down right away into something harmless and so forth, okay? So these advertisements are happening kind of right along the same time as Rachel Carson is compiling all this evidence in this book. Companies have the imperative to make money. And so, they don't want to have too many adverse effects, but companies, because they exist to make money for their owners and investors, the moral imperative, the legal imperative for these companies is to get chemicals like DDT into as many products as you can. So this is more than just spray foggers going down crop rows. This is getting stuffed into things like wallpaper where, with the benefit of hindsight, we can say this is probably not a good idea. Like, what kid hasn't licked stuff that they shouldn't be licking? And maybe the wallpaper shouldn't have a chemical strong enough to kill lots of different organisms in it. Okay, so here are people getting fogged at the beach. This is a two-page spread in a magazine. This is one of those fogger trucks we were talking about. So we see similar equipment in wildland firefighting where we're not necessarily spraying DDT, but we have it, a sprayer like this mounted on the back of an ATV or wildland firefighting engine, something like that, to deliver water instead of DDT. Back in the day, this was how we delivered this stuff. And because it was so good at killing mosquitoes and helping to curb at that time some pretty heinous mosquito-borne illnesses like malaria, which to this day still kills lots of people around the world, mostly in tropical areas. The conclusion was, okay, we have this really effective tool. Let's use it everywhere we have people, and we'll solve a public health problem with DDT, right? We developed this new solution. Let's get it out there and save a bunch of lives, okay? So you get marketing images like this. They are using a partially clad woman in swimwear. This was a super provocative image. Look at this date. It was 1948. Okay. So this is like 15 years before Rachel Carson gets to write this book. And in the 40s, two-piece swimsuits that was a big deal. Like, this was a kind of a scandalous image back in the day. And now we have like people on Instagram, and I don't know, all sorts of other websites, I'm sure, maybe wearing a lot less than this, but also being used in a marketing capacity. Okay, so she's sipping her Coca-Cola through a straw, and she is surrounded by DDT to help convince people to buy this bit of hardware and then keep buying more and more refills or recharges of DDT, just pure solvent chemical. Okay, this was how we did marketing back in the day. Here's a fogger around a neighborhood. Maybe you grew up in a house that looks a lot like that. And kids literally playing in the street in the middle of this cloud. It's not immediately toxic to humans. It is immediately toxic to insects. And so this was a scene that was playing out all across America. And again, this was seen as a good thing. All right, so with that, let's not worry about that particular slide for a bit, but that's kind of the context of what that book Silent Spring was all about. So in order for Rachel Carson, a solo field biologist, kind of a wildlife biologist, kind of pushing back on this post-World War II military industrial complex, which has this huge profit motive to get as much DDT around as many people as possible, as fast as possible, and make as much money as possible for those companies' investors. She was pretty smart, and she realized, okay, I can't spend ad dollars. I can't hire a bunch of attractive swimsuit models to help people think, maybe you shouldn't be breathing this stuff in and drinking it as it falls into your glass of Coke. Maybe you shouldn't be playing in this clouds of this stuff, concentrated fog in your neighborhoods. I can't compete with that, so I'm going to go another way. I'm going to use communication tools like interpretation to head up this book and catch people's attention with this sort of evocative image of this village, hypothetical village like we talked about, where everything had gone silent, where human babies born after their parents had been so contaminated with DDT, the babies would fail to thrive, which is a live birth, and then they just get sicker and sicker and just die within a few days or weeks of being born. Okay, so it took that kind of approach to make an end run around the big corporations. Now, this class, right, we're not pro-corporation, we're not anti-corporation. They just are, right? They're just a piece of what America is. We have a lot of companies here. It's a free market capitalist economy. And that's good for a lot of things. It's also bad for some things like this. So we were hosing everybody down with DDT, fogging up everything with DDT back in the day. And it took us finding somebody like Rachel Carson to say, hey guys, let's step back from this for a minute and ask, beyond is this effective, is it wise? So there's the knowledge of how to make DDT, how to apply DDT, when and where to apply it, and so on and so forth. And then beyond that, there's kind of the wisdom of, is this a good thing for us as a country? Is this a good thing for us as humanity around the globe in general? Again, malaria does kill a lot of people, even to this day. We've made a lot of progress against it, but it's not gone yet. Other illnesses that were a huge deal around this time, like polio, have largely been eliminated, except where people are not really sort of leaning into the polio vaccine that's been available for decades and decades and decades and decades. All right. So any questions about sort of the DDT, the Silent Spring, the Rachel Carson kind of mid-century example? Let's pause right there for just a sec. Make sure everybody's feeling pretty strong on that. And then we'll jump into our next thing. So any questions about DDT? Okay. So let me finish off that section with one last question to you guys and gals about it. What modern day examples do you see of individuals or maybe smaller organizations using techniques like Rachel used to take on sort of large multinational corporate interests and push back on like marketing, sort of the messages that try to create a sense that we need or want something in our lives and we should give this company money to do it? Are you familiar with any individuals or smaller groups pushing back on more of a corporate message today? All right, let me help you out. What about, is anybody familiar with Greta Thunberg? Has anybody ever heard that name? Okay, somebody explain to the class, who is Greta Thunberg and why are we bringing her up?
she like represents environmental the environmental movement, I think, like mostly the corporate like use of fossil fuels and other harmful things in the atmosphere.
Yeah, that's a pretty good start. So the idea that she had was to basically skip school on every Friday, until the world started doing something about climate change, climate forcing, climate destabilization. We got lots of different ways to kind of name it or label it using our techniques, and understand it thereby. And other folks started cottoning on to this idea, and we're like, yeah, so maybe Greta understands that we make the world that we gotta live in and try to survive. And things are, at least in terms of climate, accelerating in a pretty negative direction. And the acceleration is accelerating, if that makes sense. And yes, we can change things. We have a meaningful stake in preventing the worst of those climate disasters happening in our lifetime, but it takes a lot of people pulling on the rope to do that. So Greta doesn't have a huge ad budget. She won a couple of $1 million prize for being an environmental conservation climate activist voice on the global stage. And she turned around and donated all that to environmental causes, folks sort of working in other ways, because, you know, for her, it's not about money, it's about survival. And I think that's fair. So if you, for example, wanted to boycott this class on Fridays, that might be a good learning experience. I'm joking. We don't meet on Fridays, except for on our field trip. I hope you don't boycott that. Anyway, okay, so the idea here is that this is a kind of asymmetric technique that you don't need millions of dollars to do. You don't need to hire celebrity endorsements, or these days we would call them influencers, right? People literally buying the power of popular, typically young, typically beautiful people, and using that to sway opinions and sell products. Okay, we can do this stuff. It works. I mean, like, we know who Greta Thunberg is because this stuff works. We talk about Rachel Carson because our techniques work. Okay, cool. All right, moving on from there. So for today, the goal was to kind of start wrapping up the figurative language techniques list, and to start moving towards a place where you could send me a copy of that so I can see your definitions and examples of each. And we had a chance to cover and define and provide examples for a bunch of them the past couple of class sessions. So we want to kind of close that off and move on to next things. Anybody have any questions about maybe one of the techniques you just had a lot of trouble finding, or really getting, really metaphorically wrapping your hands around? This is probably your last good chance to have me answer or define any of these for you. Go.
I had trouble with the framing narrative.
Yeah, okay. So did you ever see the Disney movie Aladdin, Kendra?
Yeah.
All right. Do you remember like the first opening lines of that movie? Ah, salam and good evening to you, voiced by Robin Williams. So the character telling us this story out of the old book Arabian Nights, or Arabian Nights, like Arabian days. All right, I'm not gonna sing the whole thing, but you get the idea. That's a framing narrative. So the movie opens up and we're hearing this sort of caricature voice of Robin Williams as this mysterious character telling us a story out of Arabian Nights. That's the frame story. Okay, the Aladdin movie is not about that character. That character introduces the framed story, the one inside of that. So we go from paying attention to this random person introducing the concept of the Book of Arabian Nights and the 1001 Tales of Scheherazade, and in the song, pretty quickly we get to, all right, let's talk about one of the 1001 Tales of Scheherazade. And that story is the story of Aladdin, the pauper who would be prince. And then most all of the movie is about Aladdin and Jasmine and Jafar and Iago, his little parrot, voiced by Gilbert Godfrey, and so on and so forth. And the genie, all of that. And then at the very end of the movie, we move up and out and away from the framed story back to the storyteller, that random person who was telling us about 1001 Tales of Scheherazade. Okay. So that's a
Okay.
framing story. You use one story, and then somebody inside that story tells another story. In Princess Bride, Fred Savage has the story of the Princess Bride read to him by his grandfather. And so at a couple points in the movie, especially at the very beginning and the very end, we're at the outer framing story, and then we drop down into the story of Wesley and his betrothed and the screaming eels and never match wits with a Sicilian, never try to win a land war in Asia, and so forth. And then at one point there's a confusing moment in the framed story of the Princess Bride about the Princess Bride and the other characters. And so Fred Savage asks a question, taking us out of the framed narrative and putting us back in the framing narrative in Fred Savage's bedroom with his grandpa reading a book, bedtime story. And then grandpa answers the question and he's like, do you want me to continue? You good? Okay. And then we drop back down into the tale of Wesley, who's not all dead, he's only mostly dead. And then at the very end of the movie, Fred Savage is asleep and his grandpa closes the book, and we jump back out of this medieval fantasy tale back into Fred Savage's modern day bedroom, and the movie's over. Okay, so it's a story nested inside of a story. Framing narrative, framed narrative. Okay, so you can use this in interpretation to be the framer or to set up an easy mechanism to explain things that might be confusing in the framed narrative. All right, it's just a way to particular technique of telling stories, a framing story and a framed story. Cool.
Cool.
Cool. All right, cool. Those are a couple of examples for you. You can use either one of those or another one that you can think of. That's fine.
Okay.
All right, is Kendra going to be the only one brave enough to jump in? Any other questions about definitions and examples? All right,
I
if you're already
also
done.
had trouble finding the self-targeted humor.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so self-referential joke is kind of the only good, safe, in a professional context way to use humor to help connect with people. So, for example, let's back up a step and just go through the benign violation theory of humor, and then we'll use self-referential humor to kind of tighten that up and calibrate it. So the basic idea of humor is that you create an expectation in people, even with a joke as short as a one-liner, where you introduce something, typically a hypothetical, and then you elaborate on it so people have an expectation. So it's you identify a thing, then you elaborate on the thing, and then you twist the thing. So whatever people were expecting you to say for part 3 or the third beat of a joke, the punchline, it's not what people expected. And that twist is 2 things. It's a violation of the expectation, right? So an unfunny joke is one where you set it up and then you elaborate on it, and then the punchline is exactly what people were expecting you to say. Like, why did the chicken cross the road? Hypothetical chicken. Why did the chicken cross the road? What's the answer to that question?
To get to the other side.
Exactly. And Ben is doing me a solid as a wingman here. Like he kind of
didn't like guffaw laugh, just like breathed out through his nose without showing his teeth, like kind of low grade humor. Why did the chicken cross the road to get to the other side? That's not funny, right? Because everybody expects that punchline. But when you hear a joke that is funny, very commonly, people, they're twisting what you're expecting them to say. There's a societally acceptable answer to most of these questions that's very obvious. The more obvious it is, and the better the twist on it, the flip, the switch to the unexpected answer, the more funny the joke is. All right, so we're violating social expectations of what the punchline should be, because an unfunny punchline is exactly what we'd expect it to be. It's a benign violation because we're joking about something, we're not actually doing the thing, okay? For example, there are comedians who joke about Jeffrey Dahmer, the serial killer who ate people and, you know, like raped a bunch of young men and stuff like that, and it's like stored organs in his fridge and made pate and stuff like that. But we can joke about Jeffrey Dahmer, maybe not appropriately in the context of interpretation, but stand-up comedians, for example, they can mention Jeffrey Dahmer and so forth. And they can talk about some pretty genuinely horrible things that happen because it's a benign violation, right? So you're safe in the comedy club, you're safe at home watching the stand-up comedian on YouTube or Comedy Central's streaming service, whatever that is. And you hear somebody say something outrageous about a genuinely awful person, Jeffrey Dahmer, who killed a bunch of people, and you're safe and the comedian is safe. It's a benign violation of the social order and expectation, okay? So the reason that self-referential humor is pretty key for us in environmental interpretation is because we don't want to have your participants, your folks who are kind of putting themselves out there on your hike, they don't know what to expect until you sort of bring them safely through it. Imagine if any of those people is the butt of a joke you're telling. Well, that's a much less benign violation because you could be saying some pretty insulting or hurtful things, you know, to a stranger in a professional context, and that stranger probably has friends and or family around them. Relatively uncommon for people to enjoy interpretation solo with a guide. So yes, absolutely use humor. Use it as much as you can, but do it appropriately and in a professional context, because we certainly don't want to be coming across like we are attacking people that we are talking with. We don't want to come across like we are talking down about or attacking people with humor that aren't present, because that gets into things like potential, you know, racism, sexism, classism, just kind of sort of bigoted humor in general. So humor is a powerful tool. You can warm up kind of an aloof set of participants or groups really effectively and really well by instead turning that humor on yourself and saying, I'm the butt of my joke. And that is a benign violation because people know that you aren't really being serious and down on yourself and so forth. People pick up on the idea that you might be speaking to them, but you're putting yourself as the target of the statement instead of imputing it to them, targeting them with it, and so forth. So for example, this semester we will watch an amazing, amazing example of interpretation by a guy named Shelton Johnson. Briefly mentioned him earlier this semester. And Shelton opens up an example of an interpretive hike at Yosemite National Park, where he talks about oak trees and all kinds of social and environmental history at Yosemite. He opens it up with a joke about himself, and he says something to the effect of, in the sort of pregame part of his outline that we started creating last week, he says, all right, so we're about to go on a short walk here, and you know, to the extent that you can, try and keep the group together. because I don't want to start walking and then turn around and see that nobody's with me, because then I'll get sad and cry. And you wouldn't want to see a grown man cry, would you? And you hear a bunch of people in the audience just kind of chuckle and laugh, because that's a very gentle and socially acceptable and humorous way of saying, hey, I know that everybody can't, jog or sprint this entire hike we're about to do. So I'm going to create a safe and welcoming expectation of a relatively slow walking pace. And I'm going to make myself the butt of the joke of it. Please don't let me get away from you, because then I'll cry. And everybody there is aware that it's pretty absurd that a professional interpreter, especially one of Shelton's skill level, would turn around, see nobody around him, like everybody just noped and pieced out of there. And he's just like standing alone in the parking lot, holding his Ranger flat hat, crying to himself. It's a funny mental picture because it violates our expectation of the dignity, almost the nobility of park rangers. A lot of research studies have said that park rangers in uniform are often the highlight of people's visits. So imagine being that person and knowing that people came here to see Mariposa Grove. They came here to see El Capitan and Yosemite Falls and, on their bigger trip, through Yellowstone and all of that. And then imagining that person crying. Okay, so all that long answer to say that's the definition of humor. It's benign violation. And the way that we make sure that it's benign, that we don't possibly offend anybody, is that we aim it at ourselves. We are always the butts of our own jokes. Okay, even if you sort of made, let's say you're talking about historic figures. General John A. Logan around here, super active in the Civil War, right? Big deal. And say you're leading a guided hike around Shawnee National Forest, and part of your hike is talking about the social history of Shawnee National Forest and the Underground Railroad nearby and the Civil War battles fought kind of in and around this area, the forts nearby, that sort of thing. And you make a joke at General John A. Logan's expense, like, yeah, that guy was a real jackass or whatever, trying to kind of soften up your participants, just make a joke, have everybody laugh and warm up and kind of open up a little bit and be a little bit more interactive and present with you. What if one of John A. Logan's descendants is in that group and you just called their great granddad, a jackass? You just lost that person, and they're going to go away from this and be like, yeah, like we had a great time on Shawnee. It's an amazing place, but man, that interpreter was a real jackass. Okay. So, ideally we're not going to be swearing much in these professional presentations anyway, but we especially don't want to run afoul of any of our participants, even by accident, even with a joke that seems pretty harmless to us, because you're out in front of the group, or I'm out in front of the group, or any of us is leading this thing. They are looking to you. There's a real power differential here. You're the leader, you're the guide. You set the tone, the pace, the ethic of your time together with people. So if you're making fun of people, even dead people, that's not good. But it's okay to poke a little bit of fun at yourself, not like, completely tear yourself to shreds, like, I'm not okay, feel bad for me and then go start on a hike. That's probably going way too hard into it. But yeah, absolutely use a little bit of humor. It's awesome. Just keep it benign by keeping it self-referential or self-referencing humor. All right, great question. Super long answer. Nice. Any others? Okay, let's move on. So I'm gonna consider that, since nobody else is asking questions, that we're pretty well good to go with our figurative language tools list. If you go on our course website, you'll see a link to upload a copy of it, but please keep your original, even if it's handwritten, like you printed it out, just take a picture of it and submit the photo. You don't have to like scan it into a pretty PDF or anything. Just get me some copies so I can see kind of where you're at. And that will kind of be enough for that. We'll hang on to these and we'll come back to your figurative language techniques list throughout. I really do mean for this to be working, living, expanding over time list of things for you so that you don't really have to reinvent any wheels. A lot of this work has been done for you by those who've gone before in a good way. So our goal is to practice with it, become facile or low friction with using a lot of these things. Okay, cool. All right, so from there, that's now done. Send me a copy later on today, right after class or during class while you're kind of staring at me, that's fine. Let's move back into the template, that 5-part template that we had just started towards the end of class on last Wednesday. Okay, so this is the part 0, doing a bunch of research and getting to know this topic that you're going to be interpreting with people, falling in love with that topic, learning a ton of stuff about it, going deep dive into it. As the Zoomers would say, going ham, or as late millennials would say, going off the chizzy with it, and so forth. Okay, so that's the part that doesn't really make it much onto our template of what to do like day of the interpretation while you're delivering the interp. But it's often, excuse me, the biggest and most effortful part. Like if you are interpreting primitive living skills, well, you want to get real good napping, so using bits of rock to hit or apply pressure to other rocks to make things like spear points or arrowheads or hide scraping knives. If you are interpreting cave diving, you probably want to have some scuba gear and try on some scuba diving, if not necessarily cave diving, because that's super dangerous, but so that you can be the thing rather than appear to be the thing. Okay, if you are reaching out to hunters to interpret what's some of the wildlife history around Crab Orchard, like in the year 1700, how is it different or the same than what it is now? Well, in some ways it was a super different landscape, and in some ways it was exactly the same. You can bet that some, maybe even a lot of those hunters are pretty into hunting if they are joining you for a fireside chat at a campground on at Crab Orchard, or a guided hike, something like that. Like they probably know a thing or two. So you wanna be able to at least keep pace with the diehard fans of whatever your topic is. Okay, so this is me giving you permission for the purposes of this class formally to get into the topics and do the topics and learn more, get some of the stuff, practice some of the skills, go to some of the places around Southern Illinois associated with whatever topics you pick for this semester. Okay, so again, that's the sort of pre-part 0 research, getting to know it, falling in love with it, like living the thing, so that you can bring some of that love and excitement and kind of wisdom and insight about the thing to your interp, instead of just like, so this is my TED Talk on hiking. Did you know that the first and earliest humans were hikers in a form of hunting called exhaustion hunting in the African savanna, where they would walk towards prey for up to several days at a time until the wildlife dropped of exhaustion, and then the early humans would eat it? Like, that's not really exciting. Like, if you are super into hiking, let's go on one of the many amazing hikes around Southern Illinois and see your excitement just throughout how you walk down the trail. Let us hear your excitement as you are telling us about it, teaching us some tips and tricks, giving us the insider track on this stuff. People get excited when you are excited. They're looking to you to know how to be. Okay, so that's awesome. And it's just, again, another excuse for you to do the thing, fall more in love with it, get to know it better. Then the next part, the very first part of day of, is sort of the pregame show. Checking over the trail, making sure it's safe to go on. Checking and making sure there aren't any down power wires at the amphitheater you're going to use. checking to make sure that the speaker for the sound clips you want to play, maybe of sea chanties or African American slave labor songs out in the field versus house slaves, the kinds of things they would sing to keep time, to teach each other things, etc., and so on. You got to make sure that that speaker isn't blown out and that it's plugged in, and that somebody didn't, I don't know, look up some sketchy website and it's going to blast some extremely inappropriate audio when you hit play because you didn't realize somebody was using that sound system after you did last time. So the pregame show is, it's collecting yourself, it's checking through the space, making sure your safety and first aid kit good to go, making sure your interpretive objects. So you might have a fire steel if you're demonstrating some primitive living techniques. Your tools, if you are disassembling and reassembling, so field servicing things like black powder muskets, cannons, like, is that stuff ready to go? You just check it over, of course, because the one time you don't, that's going to be when somebody else borrowed it or the thing is broken and you look like an idiot because somebody stole the flint out of your supplies and you're just hitting your fire steel with like a limestone rock, and you could be doing that from now until the end of time and you're never going to get a spark out of it for geologic reasons and so forth. So that's part 0. And then part 1 is you start the introduction. You give folks that hook and introduce your theme, which we'll talk a lot about today, and then move into your thematic points, looking at the position adopted by your theme about your topic through a bunch of different perspectives. Hands-on, better than not hands-on. Interactive, better than passive. On-site, better than off-site, and so forth. Okay, so you have anywhere from 3 to 7. So kind of 5 plus or minus 2 is a good rule of thumb for how many different perspectives you want to have, how many different topical or thematic points you have. And then you go into the last section of kind of wrapping things up, restating the theme, connecting everything back to the theme. And then your interactive time formally is over, but for you, the interpreter, it's not over. Your post-game show, so to speak, is hanging around, answering questions. People admire interpreters for what they get to do professionally. And so very commonly, the first question you're gonna get is, how do I get your job? Like, how do I do what you do? So that's kind of a neat little clue that this is a good career and so forth, okay? And then you've broken up with the audience and said, hey, thank you, this is kind of all the time we have. And the question askers ask their questions, you help them with that, and then you go away and recollect your energy level. You get a little bit of water, have a snack, sort of regather your energy, and then into the pregame show for the next group or tour or hike or whatever it is, okay? Cool. So that was the super high level kind of quick preview of this template, kind of 5-part template that we're going to use all semester long to format your content into recognizable interpretation. And then we'll fill that template in with a bunch of figurative language techniques and games and other interactive non-game things and question and answers and all sorts of ways to spark surprise and delight among your participants. But in order for us to get to all of those sort of in the field, in the middle of things, thematic point techniques, you need to sort of land pretty heavily for a little while on this idea of the theme, okay? So for the next little bit, we're gonna have sort of our first new notes for the class, 47 minutes into the class. And let's talk about themes for a bit, okay? So for this class, we're gonna kind of present these as rules. So if you want to kind of, in your notes, arrange this next little section as a short checklist of a half a dozen or so different characteristics of a good theme. as we're practicing interp throughout our semester together with each other, we're gonna basically just go down the list. Did this theme statement I just heard do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, good, awesome theme, excellent. Okay, cool. So make sure that you got a functional note-taking capacity available to you, pen and paper or what have you, and we'll get into it. Let's see here. Yeah, there it is. Perfect. Okay, so the first kind of checkbox that we want to fill for your theme statement, again, this is one sentence, exactly one sentence, no more and no less than one complete sentence. We want the theme to answer the question or the assertion, quote, after they experience this interpretation, I want my participants to understand that. Okay. That's number one. So this question or assertion, kind of fill in the blank, helps remind you, the interpreter, why. This is the why question. Why is my topic important? So as an example, this will be kind of a tongue-in-cheek or slightly humorous. Hopefully it's not that funny, but work with me here. It's a forestry joke. All right, hopefully you can see this. Only blank can prevent wildfires. That's a theme statement right there. And that's the whole interpretation. That's the whole message, period. The joke being that somebody has climbed up on this, public billboard and spray painted in presumably their own name, unless they got a buddy they really don't like and they're trying to get them arrested. All right. So a theme is a couple of things so far. We know that it's a complete sentence. We know that it answers the, I really need my participants to understand, in the case of that example, you, whoever you are, you have a personal stake in preventing wildfires. This is not just a concept floating out there in the ether. This is the function of my choices and your choices and everybody else's choices, including Smokey the Bear and the US Forest Service. Only you can prevent wildfires. There are a bunch of other things implied by this, but the basic core of this theme is you have to own it. I have to own it. We each individually and collectively together have to own the idea that even in some small way, wildfires are on us. Like how we've managed our land in the past, how we are living in that landscape now. Okay, cool. So what the next piece, which is kind of an elaboration on it is a complete sentence, is a topic is not a theme. So a topic is your subject area. I'll put up on screen here for a sec a couple of example topics. And there we go. Hopefully you can see this. So the list on the left is topics. Central hardwood forest, like we live in right here. The derecho, that huge storm with 105-mile-an-hour straight line winds in Southern Illinois in 2009. That's a topic. Each one of these is a phrase. There's no verb attached to these, okay? So each of these is a noun, if you want to think of it that way. Undergraduate education, what some of you are going through. Graduate education, which some of you are going through, others are hoping to go through. Maybe others are pretty well done with college already, and that's not the right call for you, which is fine. Those are just topics, okay? So when I'm asking you to identify a list of 2, 3, 4 things on day 1 of this class, if you remember, that you love, that you're genuinely passionate about, that you get excited about, that you devote some of your life to maybe, those are topics. And the why you love them, the what you want people to take away from hearing you get super nerdy about whatever it is you love in the context of interpretation, that's the theme, okay? So we're gonna take a topic and turn that phrase or that word or that proper or common noun into a complete sentence, okay? So add that to your checklist. Next checklist item for a theme. It's gotta provoke. It's gotta be a thing that elicits some kind of response. And we saw that kind of alluded to with the 6 principles of Tilden that you guys were working on the last couple of days. And number 7, that might be added to those 6, if you recall that. It can't just instruct, it's got to provoke. If it's just instructing, it's environmental education. If it's just instructing, it's just factoids, it's just nouns, it's just phrases, the thing, whatever its characteristics are, whatever its descriptives are, whatever. But the theme has got to get past that into some kind of a stance, some kind of a assertion or question about your topic that provokes some kind of response. And the specific type of response that we are looking to provoke is an emotional one. Like you can hit people with factoids in the head, and within a couple of weeks, they're going to remember less than a quarter of what you said. And that's fine, because why should they care about a bunch of factoids? Everybody's busy. Everybody's just trying to figure it all out. But when we are genuinely interpreting something, you get the chance to help them understand the why at a deeper, more powerfully affective level by, again, earlier answering that question, I really need people to understand XYZ about this topic, okay? So it's not just hunting waterfowl in the Great American Flyway where we live. This is how you can put food on your table when all else has failed. It's look at the amazing ecosystem that you and I live in, and that some of the most beautiful participants in this ecosystem fly through every day. Okay, so it's evocative. It's trying to provoke some kind of a response like delight or wonder or fear or curiosity or love in the same way that you love and are excited about the thing. We got to be very careful about intentionally trying to provoke an anger response, because anger is a normal and even an appropriate response to a non-benign violation of expectations or norms, okay? So it's got to provoke. All right, let's see. Next checkpoint or checklist item for crafting a good theme. You want an active verb, not a passive verb. So off to the side of your checklist of a half dozen or so items for constructing a theme, I want you to craft the following 22 item word list. These are the passive or helping verbs. And where you see these in a theme, that's like right past yellow flag into orange, maybe even red, okay? So here's the word list. Be, am, is, are, was, were, been, have, has, had, do, does, did, can, could, will, would, shall, should, may, might, and must. We'll go through that a couple of times. So capture as many of those as you can. We'll go through it a couple of times. Be, am, is, are, A-R-E, was, were, been, B-E-E-N, have, has, had, do, does, did, can, could, will, would, W-O-U-L-D, shall, should, may, might, must. And title this little list off to the side of 22 items, the passive voice verbs. And again, you don't want these in your theme. You want any of the hundreds and hundreds of awesome, provocative action verbs in your theme. So by contrast, when you are stating a fact, you tend to use passive voice verbs. So it is cloudy outside today. The Civil War was a pretty bloody affair. People should recycle more. Nobody is provoked by any of these statements ever. Okay, so because interpretation tends to very commonly be about a meaningful or impactful process or cycle or dynamic or sequence of events or story, all of which matter because you wouldn't pick something that doesn't matter. That's not interesting. All of those require active verbs to tell those things. And you might use some passive voice language here and there to say, General John A. Logan was born in 18, right? And you want to use those passive voice verbs as sparingly as you can. Nobody cares what year John A. Logan was born. We might care, maybe, about a detailed or really vivid, even provocative characterization of the time in which he was born, the circumstances, the social issues in which he was born and he became a general. Like, that's interesting stuff. I mean, early 1800s America is just completely batshit weird. Like, if you ever saw the musical Hamilton, people are dying in duels, you know, around the time that John A. Logan is born. Most of America isn't America yet. Native Americans are getting slaughtered by the hundreds of thousands over the next couple of decades around this time. Like, there's a bunch of crazy stuff going on. That's a lot more interesting and provocative and meaningful than General John A. Logan was born in 18, I don't even know because I don't care. Okay, so what we are doing is we're interpreting the importance of the context in which John A. Logan came up and affected the course of the Civil War. As we're saying that's important and meaningful and worth our time together. We're saying the specific year in which he was born, not important. Okay, you are making that choice. That is interpretation, selecting what is in and what is out. Okay, so our current bullet point here is your complete sentence must have an action verb. And typically it is for those of you grammar nerds out there, it's a transitive action verb. It's got a direct object, maybe an indirect object. Okay, so that verb is doing something to someone. Maybe that someone is you, the participant. You'll see a lot of you language, a lot of attributional language in a theme. And that's our next point. Okay, so the topic is verbing you. So our next checklist item is a good theme uses attributional language. You, us, we, our, ours, and so forth. Okay, so personal pronouns, possessive pronouns, grammatically speaking. So this is how we operationalize or transfer from Tilden's principle that interpretation addresses the participant through the interpreter. And it's about them. It's about the whole person. It's not about John A. Logan's biographical facts, like he was 5'8" and he weighed such and such and he was born such and such, whatever. Those are dry, boring biological facts. I don't care how tall John A. Logan is, unless that is meaningful somehow. And maybe it's meaningful in terms of Abe Lincoln being a pretty tall dude and standing head and shoulders literally and metaphorically over some of his political opponents. But maybe it does, maybe it doesn't matter for John A. Logan. So I'm interpreting that selection of facts to include, okay? And we use attributional language. We express the theme as much and as often as possible in terms of relation to the hearer or the reader, the participant. Hugely important. So on another level, the attributional language and the active verb, if you want to think of it this way, your sentence has a clear subject and predicate, for those of you familiar with that. Okay, let's pause right here. Any questions about these guidelines? We're going to use them more as rules than guidelines for the context of this class, so that by the time you are done with this class, you have a better calibrated sense of when can I kind of break this rule. Like Park's real hard ass about making sure this is an active verb. And he just spent like 20 minutes talking about verbs in a forestry class. When can I get away with not doing that? Sometimes we can. For example, on that billboard we just saw, only Josh can prevent wildfires. BM is our was, were, been, have, has, had, do, does, did, can, oops, could, will, would, shall, should, may, might, must. Only Josh can prevent wildfires. A more tightly written theme statement along that would be, only Josh prevents wildfires. That's an active verb. He's doing a thing, he's preventing something. Okay, cool. The reason that we are limiting ourselves to one sentence, and this is not a checklist item, but the reason we are keeping this so short is that people who are in love about something tend to kind of ramble about it. And we have 3 seconds. 3 seconds, like we talked about our first day of class, looking at signs out by Campus Lake, to help folks understand what the topic is. Why should I care? Otherwise, I'm moving right along. 3 seconds. And that is verified over and over in different kinds of field research with environmental interpretation, but also just communication in forestry in general. All right, so questions so far about themes? All right, we're about the halfway point for class, just a few minutes over. So take a minute or two, please, by all means, step away from your computers, stand up, get some water, pause your camera, whatever. Come on back in a couple of minutes. Use the loo, the head, the bog, the restroom, wherever you need to, and come on back. Okay, get your blood flowing again. I know listening to me talk on Zoom is a little rough. See you in a few. All right, we'll start in about 1 more minute. Those folks are coming back. Okay. While we're talking about themes here, for those of you who are graduate students in the class, we'll have just a little bit of extra side channel dialogue in terms of why we are using these particular rules as rules. There's a ton of research starting at about 1950 with kind of language's effect on relationships with behavior. So interpretation is all about creating a healthy and safe and constructive environment for people to try on some interesting or maybe better behaviors, like learning how to protect bald eagle habitat in a hike around Crab Orchard National Wildlife Refuge's shore, so that you're improving the protection of bald eagles in this area by sort of walking people literally through it. There's a ton of research, elaboration likelihood model, theory of planned behavior, optimal arousal theory, all kinds of stuff like that. That's not necessarily sort of the point at this stage for our undergraduates, but for you, this might be more helpful as you are thinking about maybe a thesis or a graduate project or an internship or externship graduate deliverable. Okay, so I'll put that on the course website for you. All right, hopefully you got everybody back now, and let's continue on. All right, let's see here. All right, good. This is a good structure so far. Leave some space at the bottom of your theme list. So we got, what, probably 4 or 5 entries on it so far. We'll add a couple more later in the semester once we understand why they're important. But this is a pretty solid foundation to work from. So let's do a quick exercise together here in class where you can ping me with questions and get reassurance that you're not off on some other planet, metaphorically, with this particular work. So think back to our conversation on day 1 of class. What are some things that interest you, or maybe interest you so much that you would sort of unabashedly say, I love doing XYZ? Or I care a lot about XYZ. Some of the answers we had from our class that day were, I really love hiking and camping. I really love dogs. Like, I'm a dog person, and so forth. Some people really loved hunting and or fishing. Okay, that's going to be our general topic for today's exercise. So a couple of super influential folks in the field of interpretation have this sense that as long as we're keeping this short checklist of things that a theme statement's got to fulfill in mind, it's not super hard to do that. All right, so let's walk through a couple of these together. Let me pull up a list of some common forestry themes. Okay, so remember, for our purposes in this class, forestry is more than just trees. It's ecosystems, it's human ecosystem interactions like forest econ. It is human history in forested ecosystems. It's a lot of stuff, okay? So let's take a look at this right here. All right, so hopefully you can see this all right. Provocative personal expression theme, or excuse me, Freeman Tilden's points number 4 and number 1. All right, so mammoths lived here, Southern Illinois, a few thousand years ago. That's a fact. Natives of this area use natural fibers to fashion clothing and tools. Fact. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was born in this room. Fact, but not really about Southern Illinois. Dendrochronology data indicate that this area experienced alternating periods of woodland and forested structure, or the atlatl was used to maximize the kill potential of short throwing spears. Okay, you see a couple of passive verbs in there. Each of these is a complete sentence, subject, predicate, or subject, verb, whether passive or active, and sometimes an object. I'm not excited about any of these statements. Maybe you aren't either, and you're kind of waiting for me to get to the point. So using these examples, I'll use these for you at home following along. Use your general topic. So if you answered on day 1 about, yeah, man, I'm super into hunting, like that's my jam. Hunting is your general topic. That's step 1. So 3-step process for taking a topic into a meaningful theme statement. And the 3rd step is going to have just basically all of those checklist items baked into that 3rd and final step. But anybody can do 3 steps. You got this. So first, answer the statement. At the end of our interpretation, I want my participants to understand, and then write just your general topic, 1 or 2 word phrase, hunting. At the end of our interpretation, I want our participants to understand mammoths or natives of this area, Native Americans, First Nation. At the end of our interpret together, I want our participants to understand Franklin D. Roosevelt, former American president. At the end of our interpretation together, I want my participants to understand this area and its alternating periods of woodland and forested structure. So woodland, for those of you not in the forestry program, woodlands are open canopy forests where you have trees, but it's not a continuous overhead leafy canopy versus closed canopy forest. So patches of prairie, stuff like that, woodland. At the end of our interpretation together, I want everybody to understand the atlatl, spear throwing device. Okay, that's your general topic. A phrase, there's no verb associated with it. It's not particularly specific. Step 2 is take a step back from what you wrote in the blank for step 1 and ask yourself, okay, so what do I really mean when I say that 1 or 2 word phrase? What do I really mean? What do I mean to myself when I'm saying hunting? It's not just hunting in general. That's a huge, huge topic, enormous topic. Is it feeling connected to thousands of generations of my forebears in the past who all have hunted to feed themselves and their families and so forth? Is it something else? Is it a particular style of hunting? Is it a particular species? So you talk about hunting, but really in your own head, you know you mean snow geese hunting. Like it's, you know, there are other species, but only idiots care about them because it's really all about snow geese, okay? Like you're super passionate about snow geese hunting. Maybe you got a, you know, one of those 5x5 storage sheds. Maybe you got several of them filled floor to ceiling with thousands of snow geese decoys And there is nothing more fun than loading all those in the back of your truck and going back and forth to where you hunt snow geese each winter and freezing your butt off among a bunch of plastic geese. Maybe that's your jam, right? So that's what you're kind of really meaning to yourself. That's kind of the subtext, the unspoken part when you say hunting, because it's easier to say hunting. So for step 2, you would write, at the end of our interpretive time together, I really want folks to come away with a better understanding of snow geese hunting and the process of it, the satisfaction of, you know, a hunting trip well done. Okay, so it's a little bit more detailed. So we're going from your general topic to your specific topic. Take a second to take a step back and with fresh eyes, so to speak, look at your general topic and ask yourself, what do I really mean by my general topic? It's not about the atlatl, it's just a stick-like device by itself. What I'm really talking about is the amazing ability of human ingenuity to take a stick and use a specially shaped stick to, for example, whip another stick so hard at something you can kill it in one blow. I mean, that's metal AF, as the Zoomers say. And by metal, I mean wood, right? Atlatls are wood, not metal. So it's a little forestry joke there. All right, so everybody tracking so far? Cool. I'm taking for granted that everybody has at least one thing that is interesting to you. And even if you're worried that nobody else in this class is going to find it interesting, I promise you, we are going to love whatever you're talking about because you're so excited about it. It's hard to resist those cues to get excited about something when you see somebody who's genuinely passionate about what they're talking about, what they're demonstrating, what they're introducing you to. Okay. Cool. So again, take a second to look at your general topic, a word, phrase, noun, and expand that into what you're really saying. And fill it into the same blank you did, or another copy of the same blank that you did with the general topic. At the end of our interpretation, I want my participants to understand, put detailed topic in the blank. While you're thinking about that, if you haven't seen it yet, take a look at chat, where Lincoln has put in a slightly improved theme statement. That atlatl was used by our ancestors all across the world to allow short throwing spears to take down larger games such as mammoth. Okay. So we'll use that as one of our working examples here in a moment as we shift from our second pass of writing our theme statement, our specific topic, a longer expanded clarifying phrase. And then step 3 is to take that to the complete sentence that checks those half dozen or so boxes that we've got so far for your theme. Okay, hopefully everybody's got at least something in mind with that. If you need another minute or two, let me know so that I don't drop you off the back of the peloton. That's a cycle racing metaphor. We're not actually bicycling right now. Maybe you are if your camera is off, you know, no judgment, it's fine. Okay. So our third step is to take that detailed topic, the real topic that you actually want to talk about, because it's too much to talk about your general topic. It's too much in the umbrella of hunting. There's not literally an umbrella over hunting. That's a metaphor. And we're going to take that detailed topic and make that either the subject or the object of your actual sentence. Okay. And see if you can express it. See if you can express somewhere in that sentence attributional language. You, our, us, we. If it's non-attributional language, you're using a third person pronoun like them or they, he or she or it. That's less interesting than something that actually somehow connects to you and me, right? So hunting is partially about putting food on the table for some people. Hunting is also about having a blast. Everybody likes to have a blast. No pun intended with hunting, get it? Blast. Like we can all relate to that, even if we haven't had much experience hunting yet. We get that people look for leisure activities, fun things to do. And everybody's trying to make sure that we got food on the table as well. So yeah, we have some things to say to anybody about not just hunting, but maybe in this case, hunting snow geese, for example. Okay. All right, so part 3. Pick an active verb that in one word or one verb phrase suggests the story or a narrative, sort of a process, a sequence, a series of unfortunate events, a whatever. That will help it be an active verb instead of a statement of fact. Hunting is how people put food on the table. It doesn't have attributional language, and the key verb there is, one of our 22 passive voice verbs. We can do better than hunting is XYZ. So if your verb is be, am, is, are, was, were, been, have, has, had, do, does, did, can, could, will, would, shall, should, may, might, or must, switch that out. Put something better in, an active verb. Usually, it's easiest to put the provocation or the perspective spin, so to speak, or slant or whatever, on your step 3 actual theme sentence last. It's enough at first to get it into sentence form. So your detailed topic is either the subject or the object of the sentence. It is either doing the verb, an active verb, or it is receiving the action of the verb as the object. Okay, so for step 3, get an active verb, complete sentence, subject, verb, maybe with or without an object. And then look at that sentence and see how you can make sure that it has some kind of provocation in it. So the statement, the atlatl was used to maximize the kill potential of short throwing spears. Passive verb, it's just a factoid. What about something like, in prehistoric North America, as the ice ages smothered hunting habitat in a mile thick sheet of ice, an atlatl meant the difference between survival and slowly starving to death for your ancestors. Okay? Your ancestors means attributional language, check. Meant the difference between survival and slow starvation. For some people, that's going to be provocative enough. That's going to remind somebody, if they ever had a season in which they went hungry, you never forget that. You never forget that. When we see children coming out of abused homes into child protective services where their parents use starvation as a discipline technique, it's very common for those kids in their foster homes or foster care environments to literally sleep with like a box of crackers or a can of soup or something under their pillow, because being physically hungry for a protracted period of time, it changes a person for a while, developmentally, emotionally, and so forth. And it's physically reassuring. It helps to prevent debilitating anxiety attacks. To know that I got this can of soup and I don't even have a can opener. I'm 6 years old. I don't even know how to use a can opener, but I know that I got some food right here and now I can sleep. So this is provocative to anybody who's ever felt hungry before. And most of us, to some extent, at least for a little while, even if it's just a couple of hours, you know what it's like to have a, figuratively speaking, a roaring or grumbling tummy. Okay? So, talking about the difference between survival and starvation. That's dramatic. That's provocative. It's getting you to think beyond. The atlatl was a spear-throwing device against mammoths. That's just a factoid. Nobody cares. Okay. You don't have to invent anything. You don't have to prevaricate, that is sort of put an extra coat of lipstick on the truth and so forth. Like, regular life is provocative. You don't have to make up a story unless you're intentionally constructing a hypothetical as an explanation tool. But normal things, they're interesting, they're provocative, they incite or they spark a sense of wonder, a sense of curiosity. A good theme statement: grants permission is an active verb. Okay, cool. I'm going to keep talking you through a couple of examples because sometimes Foresters students find this a little bit sort of tricky the first time or two. So what we're going to do here next is, after a couple more examples from me, I will kind of open up the floor, metaphorically, to you so that we can, metaphorically, try on a few of these drafts of yours for size and help each other punch them up metaphorically. Okay. How about this for the dendrochronology topic, which just expressed some research factoid from back in the day. Dendrochronology, this is the old example of not great theme. Dendrochronology data indicate that this area experienced alternating periods of woodland and forested structure. Okay, so that's boring as hell. You could express that just coming up with something off the cuff as something more along the lines of, today, you and I get to witness the sort of swirling dance, the intricate interplay between woodland and forested structure as wildfires and flooding ravaged our landscape. Okay. That's not making anything up. It's just expressing a factoid in a way that people can actually understand. Like, you know what dancing is. You know what play is like. We know what, unfortunately, landscapes that have been ravaged by wildfires look like. It's got attributional language. It provokes us. It invites us. It elicits an emotional response by using clear and vivid imagery. A landscape ravaged by fires and flooding. The delicate dance between woodland and forested areas. We're personifying those and saying these woodlands and forests are dancing with each other. They're moving around each other. They are crashing into each other. Maybe they're slam dancing in a mosh pit. No, they're not actually doing that. This is a hypothetical. We are personifying these forests. Okay. And you and I as foresters, you know, maybe we roll our eyes a little bit like, oh God, Park is talking about dancing and forestry. This is definitely the right set of tools to talk about forestry topics like wildfires with the more general public, because they're not interested in wildland fire management. They don't care about the fire triangle. They're trying to live. Okay, cool. And they can relate to dancing faster than they can dendrochronology. So we want to reach them where they're at, address the whole person. Okay, so with that example under our belts, metaphorically, is anybody brave enough to transcribe your first draft of maybe one, maybe you've got a couple here in these last few minutes. Your first draft, it's not going to be perfect. You're not going to get graded on this. This is just free help for you. Go ahead and throw a first draft into chat. Lincoln has led the charge metaphorically. Go ahead and type your first draft into chat. We'll take a look at a couple of them and see if we can't go from good to great. Okay. We're gonna help each other a lot this semester. This is how we do it. So once you've got your first draft, type it into Zoom chat. Remember, it's just one sentence. Okay. I've got an example just off the top of my head that hopefully checks all of our boxes in chat. Go ahead and type in your first draft of your complete theme statement. There we go, Nick. Thank you. Everybody go ahead and throw yours into chat. So I'll lead the charge. Imagine the desperate battle between woolly mammoths and hungry Paleo-Americans, all cloaked in frost and snow, taking place right where you are standing now. And Nick writes, as we get rolling on our epic journey today, so we checks the box for attributional language. As we get rolling, that's our first action verb. Noise, as Key and Peele would say. Keep your, a second attributional language. Dang, son, that's like extra credit. Keep your eyes peeled. Metaphor in the theme. Oh man, this is so good. I'm going to need to vape afterwards. All right. Keep your eyes peeled for all the different colors and sizes of birds hanging out in the forest around us. Birds don't hang out. People hang out. We've got some personification, or because these are living things, this will be a version of personification called anthropomorphization. Anthropomorphization, assigning human characteristics to other living things. All right, let me read it once through without interrupting myself over and over. As we get rolling on our epic journey today, keep your eyes peeled for all the different colors and sizes of birds hanging out in the forest around us. Attributional language, active verb, complete sentence, clear subject and predicate, and so forth. Okay. As you are typing up yours and reading Nick's, is anybody provoked by Nick's? What emotion word would you say gets drawn out or elicited by that statement? As we get rolling on our epic journey today, keep your eyes peeled for all the different colors and sizes of birds hanging out in the forest around us. As we get rolling on our epic journey today, keep your eyes peeled for all the different colors and sizes of birds hanging out in the forest around us. The provocation here for me is this is an invitation to be curious. Like, it was fun kind of running around in the woods as a little kid and setting trees on fire, another story for another time, building forts, picking ticks, coming across like dead taxidermied stuff that somebody dumped in the middle of the woods, another story for another time. But I remember that sense of wonder and curiosity of like, I don't even know what's around the bend in this stream coming up next. Like, I'm a little kid, who knows, whatever. And it was just a little suburban copse of woods, little patch of woods. But there's still that sense of discovery, of journey, of curiosity, of wonder, surprise and delight. That's this kind of hook that Nick has given us, okay? So for you, Ben, Isabella, Danielle, Logan, etc., go ahead and put your first draft of a theme sentence into chat. Nice work, Nick. And you also want to hang on to these as we go throughout the semester, because we're going to build like entire hikes around these or future topics, or theme sentences that you come up with. Okay, so we'll see these again, and we'll keep building on them and fine tuning them like the engines that they metaphorically are, and so forth. Okay, we got just over 5 minutes left, so can you guys hear me okay?
I am kind of drawing a blank because I want
Please
some
continue.
more examples.
Okay.
I'm having trouble thinking of.
Let's do this interactively. We're going to help each other out this semester. So Ben, what is your general topic? Just 1 or 2 or 3 word phrase.
I'm not really sure. I don't have one. What should our topics be about? Like anything
Something
we
that
want?
you're interested in, something that you care about. So it could be in my case, it tends to be a forest rec activity, but I'm kind of biased because I'm a forest rec professor. In the past, we had a guy who just super duper admired Muhammad Ali, and he interpreted different aspects of Muhammad Ali's life to us all semester long in like every possible way that you could think of. And it was amazing because I didn't know anything about Muhammad Ali. Like, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee is sort of my stereotype quote. And he just took that topic of somebody that interested him from history, Muhammad Ali, and throughout the semester just kind of played around a bunch of different perspectives around Muhammad Ali's life, the things that he taught people, the way that he fought, how he grew up and what he had to overcome. and so on and so forth. So it can be somebody you admire, anybody from history in general, or even from your personal history. And then we take that and we run with it. If there's some kind of maybe a trip you've ever been on that really stuck with you, like it was a difficult journey and yet it was amazing despite being difficult, there's probably some useful things that you could pass on to others, some things that you learned through that, some ways that you've developed or grown through that. So it could be an experience. It could be an activity, again, like hunting or fishing or
Mhm.
hanging out with dogs. Like there's, golly, the story of humans and dogs is amazing and it stretches 10,000 years, you know, like this is a big deal. All right, so Kendra went that particular direction. Here we go. As your dog walks you, your well-being improves. Attributional language, check. This also, we haven't talked about this yet, but this theme also has a hook or a particular kind of surprising provocation. So part of the emotional response that you are eliciting as the interpreter, Kendra, is initially surprise. And that's a good thing because this is, again, a benign violation. As your dog walks you, okay, so that's kind of a funny mental picture, you know, like who's holding the leash? And everybody realizes, okay, so what she's really talking about is as you walk your dog, but maybe your dog is like more into it than you are, especially on a rainy day and they gotta like explore everything and so forth. Just the other day, sweet Emmy, she who is unspeakably beautiful and a veterinarian, was explaining to me that she sometimes explains to frazzled young energetic dog owners or owners, pet parents of energetic young dogs, that it's not that the dog is hyperactive and just has to constantly be pulling on the leash because it's got some kind of a problem. It's that the dog is not scent blind like a human is. Does that make sense? Like we can smell hot dogs and barbecue sauce and stuff like that. And dogs can smell that and everything else. So to them, walking is this whole landscape of scents that you and I are completely oblivious of. It's like we're sleepwalking. Here's a simile for you, okay? So Kendra, this is awesome. As your dog walks you, your well-being improves. So this is just a basic mechanical necessity for most dogs in suburbia and so forth. But she's surprised us. She's delighted us with a little bit of a joke embedded in this short sentence, right? As your dog walks you, your well-being improves. That's less than 10 single digits word count. That's amazing, okay? So Kendra's onto something here. And most folks can relate to dogs. And even those that can't, well, everybody can relate to humor as your dog walks you. This is awesome, okay? So Ben, as you're thinking about what you might talk about, do you have a beloved pet? Most folks do. Is there some kind of anything deeper or wiser than like a 6th grade report on my dog Ruff, who is fuzzy and likes to jump in puddles? Thank you for reading my blog, right? Like that doesn't necessarily reach out and provoke somebody else in the way that Kendra's statement here does. She's extracting some bigger, more widely universal meaning or insight or interpretation of the facts of being a dog owner as a means of kind of just kicking off the conversation. Okay, so Ben, for you, and thank you for being sort of transparent about coming up with a topic and just not being there yet. That's fine. So if that's anybody else, that's okay. I promise you, your life is more interesting maybe than you think, okay? So think about anything that you don't have to do. Think about anything that scares you. think about anything that makes you just laugh so hard, you're crying and farting and just like, it's ridiculous. Okay. Somebody else is probably going to find something along those lines interesting as well. And again, it doesn't necessarily have to be a positive thing. Like walking your dog is a positive thing. That's healthy or improves your well-being. But we can also talk about difficult or even painful things as well. Environmental and historic interpretation is a major tool worldwide for trying to reconcile people groups that have historically really struggled with each other. Like, how do you get First Nations people to the table to talk about difficult things, like how Western colonizers killed off a heck of a lot of them and then broke a bunch of promises and put them on some of the most worthless land in what is now the United States that we call reservations. How do you get folks talking about sort of America's checkered past as a slave owning nation? And so on and so forth. Like, you can totally go there, right? So anything that kind of piques your interest, Ben, or anybody else who's struggling for a topic, that's a thing. All right, we're out of time for today. It is 2:51. I'm a minute over. So I'll hang around for a couple more minutes to answer questions as you have them. We'll try and upload this as soon as we can so that you can go back over it. Bulk out your notes if you want to do that. And hopefully you're seeing how your notes are less copying down a bunch of book learning, and each set of notes that we're doing is a tool for you, like list of words to avoid, list of passive verbs to avoid, list of steps, there's only 3 of them, for getting from a general, vague, boring, factual topic to a provocative, impactful, inviting, attributional, functional theme statement, okay? All right, so class is formally over. You're totally clear to head out. I'm around for questions. How can I help you?
I think I only got confused because people were like rewording the stuff about the mammoths and stuff, and I never really thought I definitely could think of some topics to do something about, but I don't know. I didn't have anything.
Okay. So
But
yeah, you got a couple of days really to reflect on this. And I'm never, ever, ever gonna grade somebody up or down for whatever topics you choose. I mean, they're just what you choose. It's entirely 100% subjective. And the topics, in a sense, at least for the purposes of the class, they don't matter. Now, those topics are things that matter to each of us a lot. But in terms of the structure and the mechanics of being or practicing the professional functions of being an interpreter, you can use any of a gazillion topics with these techniques. Okay,
Yeah.
so don't feel like you got to find that perfect thing. Just what's something that you like, something that, you know, you'd be cool spending some time in class working on, talking about, introducing people to. We had one guy, Grant, a couple of years ago, who plays in a ska band. And so we got a couple of concerts. Like, that's a skills demonstration. That is legit a really cool piece of interp. You get to play guitar in front of people. And it slapped, metaphorically, as the Zoomers say. Okay. Cool.
Cool.
Nick, do you want me to tackle that question in chat or in voice with you?
Either way, I
Okay.
was just typing it while I was working on them. I just didn't know. I mean, I've just been pulling a lot of them straight from the like first dictionary thing after reading it and then trying to come up with examples. But if I couldn't, just like looking up an example. But I didn't know if I should like still be trying to shoot to come up with an example, you know, based on what my own understanding or whatever.
Yeah, that's a good question. So to restate, is it okay if we just transcribe the dictionary definition of a metaphor? Or do I need to like come up with some fancy highfalutin, super shiny new definition that nobody's ever seen? It's probably going to be somewhere in between those two. So
Okay, cool.
it's entirely okay to turn in the list of dictionary.com definitions of every single one of these. That's a great starting point. Over time, it's more valuable for you to restate things or rephrase things in your own words, letting your brain tear apart the idea of a metaphor and then explaining it back to yourself is way more effective than just memorizing verbatim the dictionary definition of it, for sure. Because
Cool.
at that point, you know you can do the thing functionally if you can teach that definition back to us
Right.
in your own
Okay.
words.
Cool.
All right, awesome. What else?
I had another question about the figurative language. I didn't really
Okay.
understand what you meant by space and time. Like, are you just trying to set the scene of like, I didn't really understand what that's trying to say.
Yeah, let me pull up the list. So that was one of the group headings for them, like exaggerations in space and time. Is that what I'm thinking of?
It was distorted scaling, and then under that was
Distorted
space
scaling,
and
okay.
time.
All right, so the idea there is that you can exaggerate for emphasis some process in space. Say, this thing shaped the face of the earth when you're talking about like a geologic process that carved the Grand Canyon. And hydroerosional processes did not shape the entire face of the earth. That is not a true statement. But folks will understand, okay, he's really talking about the Grand Canyon, but he has to kind of exaggerate it to help us understand the freaking huge scale of the Grand Canyon. So that's an exaggeration in space. You talking about maybe, let's say, for whatever reason, your topic is the Mediterranean and what processes shape the cultures around the Mediterranean, including what we believe to be Atlantis, that lost civilization. You can talk about how relatively recently in geologic history, at Gibraltar, that real close spot between southern Spain and the tip of Africa, water broke through a natural sort of dam or retaining wall that held the Atlantic Ocean out of that basin, and the Mediterranean filled in a matter of weeks. So think about how long it took to make the Grand Canyon, and then contrast that against the insane speed of the Atlantic flooding forward through what would become the Mediterranean Sea at over 100 miles an hour. So think like an avalanche of water. And you could exaggerate that scale in time instead of in space by saying something like the water blasted through rapid fire like a machine gun through that tiny little gap at Gibraltar until the entire Mediterranean filled in. Okay, so machine guns fire, there's supersonic rounds, over 1,000 feet per second in most cases. That's an exaggeration in time, but it was still really fast, over 100 miles an hour. So you can exaggerate stuff, so crank up the scale in space and time, say things are bigger or faster than they really are to help people understand what the true scale is. Or you can downplay, you can understate what the scale is of a thing in space or time when it's just too much to think about. So talking about the Grand Canyon, you have hundreds of miles of river and even more hundreds of miles of side channels, slot canyons, going up Bright Angel, going up Glen Canyon, Antelope Canyon, all sorts of places around the Grand Canyon. It's too much for a human brain to think about. So we can understate, we can sort of reverse hyperbolize, understate the physical size or time scale of something to make it more understandable. So for example, if you're familiar with Ozark National Scenic Riverways, just a couple hours west of us in southern Missouri, there's this place there called Big Spring, and it is a big spring. The water is boiling up out of the ground, and a way that they kind of explain the the throughput, the flux, the volume of water going through Big Spring during peak flow seasons is Big Spring could fill up Busch Stadium a couple of times a day. That's how much water's going through. So it's kind of boiling down the scale of the water boiling out of Big Spring by saying it's 2.6 Busch Stadiums every 24 hours. It's a small number instead of millions and millions and millions of gallons per day, because it's hard for us to think in big numbers. We get 1, we get 2, we get 5. So we get 1, a few, we get several, many, 10, 20, even 100 we can think about in meaningful terms. But what's $1 trillion look like? Like how high would you stack a pile of $1 bills if you had 1 trillion of them? I can't even imagine, right? It's not a meaningful number. So you understate things or you exaggerate the scale of them. So a stack of $1 bills, 1 trillion of them, reaches to the moon and back 5.3 times, or whatever the number is, right? So I can understand 5.3, and I understand in a very sort of vague, not particularly meaningful way, the distance between Earth and the moon. I know that's big. And I know a stack of dollar bills all the way out to the moon and back 5.3 times or whatever. Okay, now I understand we're talking, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of dollars. But when somebody says $1 trillion, okay, whatever that is, otherwise. So we get beyond just the fact of $1 trillion to interpreting that in some meaningful way, translating the raw number into something we can at least start to think about. So that's exaggerating or changing our description of things in space and or time. Sometimes you roll them both together. Does that answer your question, Kendra? This is a tough one to wrap your head around until you see just a bunch of examples of it, and you kind of get it after a while, I think.
It's making a little bit more sense.
Cool. All right. We'll come back to that a lot. We're not gonna escape the need to be able to express large and small things in more meaningful human scales, for sure.
Okay.
So yeah, don't panic. You're not gonna get quizzed on this stuff. So it's more just acquiring functional tool use. All right. What other questions you guys got? All set? See you next time.